Again, welcome, and I'll hand it over to Bill DeBon with NCAN.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see you all. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here. And thanks to Angela and Liz and the QIP team for hosting me. I really appreciate it. Good to see some familiar names here on the call and some friends that I haven't made yet. So, really delighted to be here to talk to you about one of my favorite topics. So I want to chat a little bit about FAFSA completion trends for the class of 2026. That's me. I'm showing on your screen. You can do some voting in the comments which set of glasses you like better. But I'm Bill DeBon. I am Senior Director of Data and Strategic Initiatives here at the National College Attainment Network. I will say that I always tell people I would not put my email address on this opening slide if I didn't want you to use it. And as some of you can attest, I try to be fairly responsive via email. So if I can be of use to you, or if NCAN can, come and knock on my door. I would be delighted to chat with you. If you don't know about NCAT, let me give you a very short elevator pitch about who we are and what we do. We are a member association based here in Washington, D.C. We have about 500 members across the country. And we are a mission-driven association, not a role-driven one. So, unlike, some other national associations that are very much role-based, we are a big tent, and anyone who can be in it who is pulling in the direction of increasing post-secondary access and attainment outcomes for students across the country. We have a lot of community-based organizations and college access programs, but we also have K12 districts and schools, state agencies, state networks, philanthropies, businesses, higher education institutions. Um, and that really signals that there are a lot of different kinds of stakeholders and professionals who have an interest in students' post-secondary outcomes. So, how do we try to serve the field? We do it by building field capacity, right? So, we have a great national conference. Come join us in Las Vegas this year in October. We do lots of webinars. We have a weekly newsletter. Trying to get resources out there that help our members be the best versions of themselves. We also advocate for policy solutions at the federal and the state level, trying to promote and advance policies that improve students' outcomes. So we are big fans of preserving and expanding the Pell Grant, for example. We were instrumental in getting FAFSA simplification through and trying to help the field weather, the better FAFSA experience in 24, 25. We also work at the states, though, to look at, what is policy programming and practice out there that states are trying, and what does good implementation look like? How can we help states compare notes? This third bucket here is around making sure that all of these different organizations that are playing in the field are connected with each other, right? We like to make lots of introductions. We like to make some warm handoffs. Oh, what you're doing is really interesting. Have you met these folks over here, right? We want to kind of bring people together and make sure that we are aligning and collaborating appropriately. So thanks for taking that elevator ride with me. I really appreciate that. And so let me ask you all a question. You can either come off mute since we're a fairly intimate group today, or you can put it in the chat. What comes to mind when you think of the FAFSA? Past, present, future thoughts about the FAFSA. I'll give you a minute here to put any commentary you have. Better FAFSA, okay. Data security, access, yep, forms, access, yep, okay. Any other thoughts here about the FAFSA? Intimidating for families, yes, okay. So, if you've seen me present on the FAFSA before, you know that the joke that I like to make is that the FAFSA is the five-letter acronym that makes people say four-letter words. That is the piece on the intimidating for families part that I certainly am empathetic to. Um, for a little while, we changed to a six-letter word, better, right? And now I think we actually are getting to a more positive four-letter word, which is good. It is good to have good news. It hasn't been the entirety of my experience with the FAFSA that I've had good news to share, although I have some to share with you today. Um, but, we spend a lot of time thinking about the FAFSA for a few reasons. Um, we spend a lot of time thinking about the FAFSA because it helps us to predict the future, right? FAFSA completion and immediate college enrollment are tightly tied for high school seniors. And you can see here that, states, and each of these circles here on this chart is a state in the given academic year. States' June 30th FAFSA completion percentage and its immediate college enrollment rate are tightly associated with each other. That's been true for, you know, 2016, 18, 20, 22, 24. Um, we see that here at the state level. We also see it at the national level, right? Where the direction of the national FAFSA completion rate change has moved in the same direction with the national first fall enrollment rate for as long as I've been tracking FAFSA completion for high school seniors. The magnitude of that change has varied, in different years, but we have never had a green arrow and a red arrow mismatched here. And so coming off the successes of the class of 2025's big bounce back, 17.5% year over year percent change in FAFSA by June 30th last year. Um, when the National Student Clearinghouse's high school benchmarks report for class 2025 comes out, I suspect that I'll be hanging another green arrow here on this chart, which is great news for students across the country. As with so many educational outcomes, unfortunately, in this country, we do often see that FAFSA completion is often inequitable, right? And so, again, each of the circles here is a state, and we can see that when we are looking at the average FAFSA completion rate by the percentile of district poverty, the lowest poverty school districts, across states tend to have higher FAFSA completion rates than the highest. Poverty school districts, right? And so there's a real challenge there because because the FAFSA unlocks federal financial aid, including the Pell Grant, which is need-based, right? We have a real vested interest as a field in connecting students who are from low-income backgrounds with the need-based financial aid that can make higher education a possibility for them, right? So we do often look at FAFSA completion top lines, but if you're coming from a state agency or network, I do encourage you to also be breaking it out by your school and community level demographics to make sure that you are directing support on FAFSA completion to the communities who need it the most, who are trailing behind. So let's get to the meat of this. I have a little bit of a presentation here to do this morning, and I'd love to open it up just for kind of general conversation. But let's take a look at how the class of 2026 is doing around FAFSA completion. So the data that I'm going to show you comes from NCAN's FAFSA tracker. Hopefully some of you have seen that already who are on the call. And so the FAFSA tracker started about 8, 9 years ago now at this point. And we noticed that this data was coming out from federal student aid every Friday. The data looks like the Excel spreadsheet on the left of this slide here. And it's really great school level data on submission and completion, and it's updated weekly. And unlike other kinds of educational outcomes, where you might get, a semi-annual or annual point in time kind of update, FAFSA completion, on a weekly basis creates this opportunity for a steady drumbeat of measuring progress and seeing how well we're doing and seeing where our efforts are succeeding and where they need a little bit more help. But, the spread there on the left, not always the most intuitive for practitioners and policymakers to look at. So what we've done every Friday for the past 9 years is to take that data and add it to, the previous week's data and populate an interactive dashboard, the NCAN FAFSA tracker, that displays data at the national, state, and local levels around FAFSA completion. And so at the local level, by that we mean congressional districts, counties, districts, schools, cities. We can cut this a lot of different ways. But notably, we do not have student level data, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And so having done this for quite a long time, the value of the tracker is that we can see kind of the shape of FAFSA completion both within and across cycles. And so having that longitudinal look is very helpful when we see disruptions in FAFSA completion nationally, like we did with the COVID pandemic and also the implementation of Better FAFSA and subsequently the bounce back from the Better FAFSA. And so we think it's a pretty useful tool. I will just say that we do have this data going back quite a long time. And so if there is some something that I can pull out of our data for your state, your community, please don't hesitate to knock on my door. People do all the time. They ask for, extracts from this community or that community from this year or that year. I'm happy to do it. And so if there's historical data around FAFSA completion that would be useful to you, please just feel free to ask. And if it's within my power to do it, I surely will give that a go. All right, that was enough wind up on the FAFSA tracker. So here's the good news that I have to report. So when I look at the estimated percent of seniors completing a FAFSA, we are seeing that the class of 2026 is really significantly outpacing the class of 2025 to the tune of about 8 percentage points through March 20th. That's great. We really love to see that. The black line there, right, is flatlined until about the beginning of December because, again, the class 2025 FAFSA opened, early in December last year. And so just by virtue of not only opening by October 1st this year, but actually opening a little bit early, the class 2026 was well positioned to get ahead and has made great use of that head start. This is all the more important because, class of 2025 was already a significant bounce back over the class of four, again, which experienced all of the better FAFSA implementation woes, right? And so the class of 2025 finished about 7.5 percentage points over the class of 2024. And now we're talking about the class of 2026 outpacing that even further, right? Really good news for students. And one thing I like to emphasize when I'm doing this kind of presentation is that I don't want you to hear from me that this is all just about juicing FAFSA completion for its own sake. That's not it. The point here is that knowing what we know about FAFSA completion and enrollment and that tight connection, and knowing that folks on this call in this field are about expanding post-secondary opportunities for students. Again, FAFSA completion is a good bellwether for students' intent to consume post-secondary education and their likelihood of matriculating to a college campus. So this is not just about FAFSA completion for its own sake. It is about FAFSA completion in service to students getting the financial aid that helps them to matriculate. When we look at the percent change in FAFSA completion relative to the classes of 2023 and 2025, there's a couple of interesting things on this chart. First, you might be saying to yourself, Bill, why are you comparing to 2023 on this chart? Like, what is the value of that? That was 3 years ago. Yes, that is true, but it also is the most recent year that we have that opened on October 1st. And so, given that 2026 also opened on October 1st, comparing to 2023 is the best kind of apples to apples comparison that we have. And we can see that relative to the most recent October 1st opening, the class 2026 is still running about 12% ahead in terms of the number of FAFSAs completed. That's awesome. The light blue line is compared to last year, the class of 2025. And so again, the class 2025 opened late, didn't open until the first week of December. And so, with the 2 month head start essentially that class 2026 had, it's no surprise that we were running 95, 77%, 62%, right, ahead of class 2025 this year. What we're going to see as more time goes on, and we're already starting to see it now in this chart, is that, the orange and the blue lines are probably going to converge somewhere, right? As more time goes on, that head start is going to make less of a marginal difference week to week for the class of 2025. But again, running 19% essentially through mid-March from previous year is very good. This is all encouraging news. Again, it's good to have good news for me to share. As I mentioned, the Fast Tracker doesn't track just at the national level, but we also do kind of a state level leaderboard. This is intended to create a little bit of friendly competition here among states. And in fact, I think has, right? I think it has helped us to lift up great FAFSA level in the time that we have been running the FAFSA Tracker. And so on the left-hand side here, you see the top 10 for states by the percent of seniors completing a FAFSA. And on the right-hand side, we have the year-over-year percent change relative to the class of 2025. Although I do have the percent change to 2023 also there as a comparison, just for reference. The asterisks here, and we'll talk about this a little bit down the line in my presentation, are signaling which states have universal FAFSA policies that require FAFSA completion as a component for high school graduation. And you can see here that 6 out of the top 10 states for percent of seniors completing have a universal FAFSA policy on the books right now. And so, we have seen, these policies kind of pushing states further up the FAFSA completion rankings. Tennessee definitely holding strong there, has been number one or number two the entirety of the time that I've been running this project. Tennessee doesn't have a universal FAFSA policy, but they do have the Tennessee Promise, right, which offers students free community college, and completing the FAFSA is a requirement for that. Beyond that, they just have a very strong culture of FAFSA completion in Tennessee, and so we continue to see a very strong performance statewide there. I kind of want to put you know, the extent of the class of 2026's gains in context here. And so this is shifting back to the national level. When we look at kind of the estimated percent of seniors completing a FAFSA nationally through week 25 of the cycle, we can see that the class of 2026 is really outpacing to the tune of 3.5 percentage points every class that I have on the books from previous years. That's great. That's really encouraging. The max that we've ever had by about June 30th for a high school class in terms of percent of seniors completing is about 54%. And if we keep on this trajectory, I think we will get to about 56, 57%, which to me is huge news, right? Is massive, like all-time high level kind of FAFSA completion. Yes, it's only 2 or 3 percentage points, but when you think about all of the effort that it takes to shift a national outcome like this, it really is a monumental kind of triumph for the field and all of the professionals who are involved in assisting students and families with the FAFSA completion process. So the efforts from FAFSA simplification and all of the efforts from practitioners and statewide campaigns really do seem to be paying off. We should keep the momentum up so that we can make sure that we do hit that all-time high. Here's another way of looking at it. So this is the line chart of the estimated percent of seniors completing a FAFSA by cycle. We can see here that we could see in the purple, the class of 2024, really was an outlier, even relative to the COVID year in this kind of light blue. We see how much of a tumble it took for the class of 2024 in that year. This is a really illustrative way to kind of see that. We see a lot of bunching together for 2017 through about 2020. There was not a lot of variance in the shape or divergence of those cycles. But we've had a few outlier years, right, over the past 5, right? We had COVID with class 2021. We had the 2024 better FAFSA implementation. But the good news here, circled in red, this is the class of 2026. And you can already see how this kind of bright blue line is separating itself from the pack. And if we stay on that trajectory, you can see quite clearly how it's going to outpace the rest of the classes that we have on the books. So I want to pivot a little bit now and talk about FAFSA data sharing policies and practices. So this comes from a policy levers project that NCAN maintains. When we get to the Q&A portion here, I can drop that into the chat. But NCAN basically tries to maintain a state level landscape of different policy levers and practices and programming that states can use to drive students post-secondary advising and post-secondary experiences. And so we've essentially been emailing and calling every state agency that we can to ask about whether and how they are provisioning student level FAFSA completion data down to districts and schools. So states can sign something called the SAIG. It's a student aid internet gateway agreement. And that turns on the flow of student level FAFSA data from federal student aid down to states. States can then turn around and sign agreements with local education agencies and in some cases community-based organizations to then turn that flow of student level data on down to practitioners. This is very helpful for practitioners in their FAFSA completion, initiatives, right? And so the FAFSA tracker is useful. Is useful. Full stop. I spent a lot of time on it. It's useful. I love it very much. It's been my pet project for quite a long time. But it is not helpful in understanding how to triage FAFSA completion support to individual students and families. And so when states turn on the flow of student level FAFSA data down to districts and schools, they're getting a regularly updated list of who they have FAFSA completions for, and in some cases, who has errors, who's been selected for verification, that kind of thing. And so, understanding which individual students have completed the FAFSA is very useful for then saying, okay, Bill, it's mid-April. It's not quite mid-April, but you get the idea. It's mid-April. You still included a FAFSA. We have on the books here that, you're aspiring to go to college next fall. What is the deal with not including the FAFSA? Is there some kind of support that we could provide to you? Do you have questions? Do you not know how to set up your FSA ID? Um, we can see now that about 40 states have, well-established student FAFSA completion data sharing. And we have three that are, somewhere in the middle. I will say that maintaining a 50 state landscape analysis is a little tricky. The second you publish it, you run the risk of it becoming a little outdated. So if you see something on here that doesn't sound quite right for your state, please do drop me a line. I am happy to update it. We'll share the deck here. I won't read all of this to you. This is kind of our rationale for why we track student level FAFSA completion data and what states in particular can do. But these are kind of the buckets that we use to classify states by their current conditions. So on the planning side of it, maybe the data sharing agreement is not conducted online, so it involves like mail-ins, or it's not available at all, right? We also include, states where we haven't been able to ascertain what are the FAFSA data sharing conditions, right? Sometimes, we knock on the door, we don't get a response, and so we put states in the bucket. On the progressing side, and you saw that was the smallest bucket on the previous page, you might not be able to download a data extract, or the way to do this kind of student level FAFSA data sharing process is not clear. You really have to jump through a lot of hoops to go through this, right? So that's kind of that middle bucket. The established piece, and you might make the case that since there are 40 states in this bucket, we should, better differentiate between these. In general, we're saying that, the process for student level FAFSA data sharing is quite clear online, right? There's like an online form, there's minimal red tape or hoops to jump through. Data might be included into an SLDS or a specific online portal for this. You can download a CSV and manipulate the data yourself if you'd like to. And, of course, like kind of the gold standard here is that the state is also providing periodic PD opportunities to LEAs on how to use this data. Got a couple good examples of public-facing FAFSA completion dashboards that I want to share. I just want to say, I imagine that some of you on this call have your own FAFSA completion dashboards. If yours is not here, please don't take it as a slight. I can only feature so many great examples on one webinar. I really do like Massachusetts's, for example, and this is for the Boston Public Schools. One of the things I like about Boston's is how they have so many kind of student categories disaggregated here. So they tie this into their state level student information system, and you can look at the different completion rates for different student groups, which is very helpful, right? Going back to this question of FAFSA completion as an equity indicator, we can see the gaps between students, and when we can identify those gaps and start to really work on them. One of the dashboard that I really like and want to highlight here is from Washington State. It's so visually striking, but there's a lot of interactivity here, which is tremendous. You can drill down into the district level, into the county level, or I think quite useful, right? So kudos to Washington State as well. One other FAFSA data sharing practice that I want here is out of Tennessee. This image now is a few years old. I'm not sure if it looks exactly like this. And I have a blog post that I can share when we get to. But a practice I really like from Tennessee and the partners there, emailing high schools, whether that is the school principal or school leaders or school counselors, kind of a FAFSA completion update periodically. This what percent of your students have completed a FAFSA? How many have submitted? What is the statewide rate? And keeping up that drumbeat of how is FAFSA going, using the data that is out there, populating that with a form email, and making sure that this is something that school-based staff can forget or get away from. The blog that I'm going to share with you also has kind of like step by step how you would do this in Mailchimp. Um, I'm not being paid by Mailchimp or anything like that. Don't take it that way. But just as a way to stand up the form letters with the back end data on how to do this, might be easier than you think that it is. So it's a very adaptable practice, I would say, for states to consider. Okay, so the last portion of my presentation here, before I turn it over to some good discussion, is around universal FAFSA. And universal FAFSA can be a divisive topic. There's been a lot of conversation about it over the past few years, but I just want to share a few thoughts about it. So going back to that policy levers project that I was talking about, universal FAFSA policies are some that are one of the eight that we consider, and you can see here on the heat map how we're looking in terms of states who haven't introduced this, as far as we know, states who have introduced universal FAFSA legislation in their legislature but haven't passed it, those who have passed it but not implemented it yet, those who have implemented it. And I need to change. I can see Maryland is on here. I need to change that. So it should actually be 9 there. Sorry about that. You can see how fluid these kinds of projects are. And then, also where we have had 3 states repeal that policy. So a good tracker here. So NCAN has a few recommendations around universal FAFSA with supports. So our recommendations, right, are that you consider including FAFSA completion as a requirement for high school graduation, either through legislative or other policy vehicles. Some folks do this as part of kind of administrative requirements. However, and this is where kind of the I'll say consternation sometimes comes in with this policy. Every state that has implemented universal FAFSA has done so with a robust, very wide opt-out system for students who are unable or unwilling to complete a FAFSA, right? So as far as we know, no student has been kept from graduating high school as a result of universal FAFSA policies. These policies largely increase the salience of FAFSA completion at the local level, right? But I don't think anyone in the ecosystem really wants to see students not cross the graduation stage because they haven't completed the FAFSA. And so there's a robust opt-out system here where students or their families or school-based staff, either a principal or a school counselor, can opt a student out. We do recommend providing at minimum 1 full FAFSA cycle in between bill passage and implementation, right, to give time for the state to provide technical assistance for schools to set up plans to implement this policy, right? No one loves implementation on short notice. We do recommend that states build to provide robust training and support, right? Do not just leave this all on district and school-based staff to implement. Wherever possible, provide some resources from the state, either in terms of marketing, materials, training, event support to ensure students are getting assistance through the process. And then, this is where the data sharing comes in. You really have to have the data sharing turned on in order to implement universal FAFSA well, right? Otherwise, how are you getting to that verification that we actually have a FAFSA completion from a student? You could do the screenshot thing and you bring that in. That's a lot more tedious. It's very onerous, and so we do recommend the data sharing as a piece there. This is a few years old now, but we can see that consistently that states who do implement universal FAFSA do see quite large jumps in FAFSA completion percentage, right? And that corresponds to a rank jump up the NCAN FAFSA tracker. These are 4 of the first states to implement the policy. But then the Century Foundation, Peter Granville and his team also looked at, what are some other measures of universal FAFSA efficacy, right? And so they saw that in general, states that were implementing universal FAFSA saw increases to their number of Pell Grant recipients. And they also saw increases to first-time undergraduate enrollment, where first-time undergraduate enrollment grew faster in the implementation year than in the rest of the United States. So these are kind of large data set kind of changes. But then when we look at quasi-experimental evidence here, so this is out of Texas, right? So the setup here was to look at school districts pre-universal FAFSA completion rate, and then to say, okay, well the treatment, the intervention here is to require FAFSA complete for high school graduation. And so then we look at college enrollment in school districts compared to their pre-universal FAFSA completion rate. And we see that in districts that had the lowest FAFSA completion rate prior to FAFSA, those are the ones that saw statistically significant jumps in college enrollment after universal FAFSA implementation, right? So if we're saying that universal FAFSA likely increased FAFSA completion in the school districts where it was lowest before the policy, then those big increases to FAFSA completion also came along with statistically significant increases to college enrollment to the tune of 2.5, 3 percentage points gains. So this kind of ties a tighter line between that FAFSA completion and enrollment association that I talked about at the start of my presentation here. So that was a whirlwind. I look forward to chatting with you during Q&A here, seeing what kind of questions and concerns you have brought with you. Would love to hear what strategies are working for you in your states in terms of driving FAFSA completion. And in general, would just love to turn the floor over to you. So I'll put my email here one more time in case I can be helpful. And thank you again to QIP for having me and for you all for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much, Bill. And as Bill said, the floor is open for questions or discussion. I am going to pop Bill's question in the chat, which was what strategies are working for you in your state to drive FAFSA completion? Just if it's helpful to see it written out to respond. Yes, Corinne, your hand is up.
Thanks so much, and thank you, Bill. Here, let me turn my camera on while I ask this question. I'm going to do the obnoxious thing and ask you about data that you did not present, which is I was curious about if NCAN has done any exploration when it comes to tracking kind of returning students' FAFSA completion, particularly into the second year. I'm thinking about students who, once they leave their K-12 institution and may not have the same kind of robust application support, and what's the data infrastructure around tracking that second year kind of FAFSA renewal completion?
So you know the old joke about why people rob banks, right? Do you know it? No. That's where the money is, right? So I track the high school seniors because that's that comes out from FSA every week. I will say that in the past, we have been able to get kind of special extracts from federal student aid around returning students and like kind of all FAFSA completions, including at the sectoral level. But that is not data that is like regularly released throughout the cycle. If we could get it regularly, I'd be happy to to kind of visualize it. It has mostly come out. It came out like during COVID, for example, right? Because we wanted to understand like what is the shape of the problem in that population. But it's not something that we have kind of regular access to. So I'm not trying to punt the question. That's just the answer to it.
Thanks so much.
I will just say like if there is more demand for it, um, if we saw more demand for it, I think we would be happy to advocate for it, right? We haven't, be honest with you, had a lot of demand, right? And so we haven't pushed that hard for it. There have been a lot of other kind of competing things at FSA, obviously over the past couple of years. So we do understand that we do understand that there is some interest, but it hasn't been as vocal as like the direct from high school kind of piece.
Yeah, I was especially curious because I felt as during the Better FAFSA launch that there was a lot of attention to first year application rates. And I was particularly concerned about returning students who were stymied in the same fashion as first year applicants and maybe didn't have as much access to support at that stage. And so we can look a little bit at enrollment data to see if students decreased their course enrollment and things like that, but it's not as clear of a line as it is when we're looking at FAFSA completion rates in particular.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think it like I'm a little bit like shooting from the hip here, but I is a there is a perception that students who have completed the FAFSA once again, right? And that there's institutional infrastructure, broadly speaking, to like provide that assistance. I think the extent to which that is true is probably widely variable, like across institutions, right? And so I would that perception may actually be a misperception, right? That we actually have the wherewithal to provide that support to returning students.
Hi, Bill. This is Julie from Delaware. Thank you for all of your support and answering my questions thus far. I really appreciate it. I just have a thought or question really for you or other states as we're beginning to roll out Workforce Pell. We are certainly going to be, working with our high school seniors who may not traditionally be going to either a 2 or 4 year post-secondary um, institution, but might be interested in some short-term credentialing for which they will need FAFSA for the Pell. And so we're just kind of building that out now. So really interested on your take on that, as well as some other people on this call.
Yeah, I mean, I think it actually, I think it provides an opportunity for states to persuade more students to complete the FAFSA, right? Like, I think a more expansive message around um, completing the FAFSA can get you funds to pay for education and training after high school, right? Might be a more inclusive message to send to students who are like, well, I'm not going to college. And like, I think I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that folks on this call know that college does not necessarily mean a 4 year residential experience, but that's not how our students and families often hear it. And so, like, I think the adding and training gives you a broader umbrella there. So I think it is possible that we could get into a more persuadable segment of the population through Workforce Pell. Now, I think there is a question. I don't want to go down. I think there's two questions. There's at least two questions here. One is, you know, from NCAN's perspective, students who are immediately graduating from high school may not be best served going to a workforce Pell pathway, right? Like if that is really what their career ambition is, right? That's great. But I think we should be encouraging students to be attending like 2 year and 4 year pathways wherever their aptitude and aspiration matches that, right? Given kind of um, the better data we have about outcomes from those programs, right? Just kind of like documented return on investment, that kind of piece. And so just kind of bifurcating between traditional age students and maybe students who are returning and trying to use Workforce Pell. That's one piece. The other piece is I think we don't have a good sense yet of how many programs in each state are actually going to be eligible for Workforce Pell funds in the early going here, right? Will it be a few years before we can actually ramp up into having a robust number of options for which students can apply? I don't think that takes away from the idea that the education and training after high school message like could be a more inclusive one. It's just a question of like, will there actually be destinations to send students to?
There's a couple questions in the chat, Bill,
Oh,
around Amber was saying that she's curious why the increase is happening, and Caitlin seconds that about theories yet about FAFSA completion increase for this class year.
so is the question about universal FAFSA increase or is it for the class of 2026? Can you clarify?
I believe it's for the class of 2026.
Class of 2026. Yes.
Well, your guess is as good as mine. But I will say that here's my theory. Here's my working theory, right? One is that you can't underestimate the value of having a 2 month head start on the class of 2025, right? Opening on time is a big deal, right? When we're opening beginning of December or even, start of January, like class 2024, you're eating like 20 to 30% of the academic year in which K-12 staff have access to students to support them to complete a FAFSA. So I think it's just like time based. I think the other piece is just is two other things. I keep saying just, but like there's a whole like laundry list of things I have to say to you. So sorry about that. The other thing is that I think college access professionals and school counselors in our systems are getting more acquainted with the better FAFSA process, right? With FAFSA completion under FAFSA simplification, right? There is a muscle memory to this, right? We're used to the screens more, right? Like we're just getting more efficient at that process. And so that's very helpful, right? If you get an error, you kind of see, you have a higher likelihood of having seen it before and knowing how to navigate it. I think the big thing though for this year is kind of the instant verification of FAFSA IDs. And so last year, right, when students and contributors wanted to go and set up FAFSA IDs, it might be 2 or 3 days before it came back and got them verified, and then they could go and actually do the FAFSA form. Now, when you have instantaneous ID verification, that means you don't need two bites at the apple for a student and family to complete the FAFSA, right? If you're having a financial aid night or a FAFSA event, you do it there, one-stop shopping. We know how hard it is to get student and family attention is for one event, let alone two, right? To ask people to come back is really tough. And so I think that is a big contributor as well. The last, like, not to go all like, vibes based kind of, empiricism here, but good news kind of does beget good news, right? Like when students and families talk, right? And so when students and families hear that the FAFSA got, their friend it only took them 10, 15 minutes to get through this year, that I think increases the likelihood of kind of like good PR more broadly throughout a community. The class 2024, everybody knew the FAFSA was messed up and was giving everybody a headache, right? And like it was going up and down, right? And it was like I would try to get log into this thing and it threw me an error, right? I was doing it for 45 minutes. Nobody loves doing their taxes, right? And so like the idea that we're setting you up for another opportunity to do a painful administrative process does not exactly endear people to it, to wanting to engage with it. So I think there is like a kind of a good news kind of experience this year too. Those are just my theories. I'm happy to accept more of them.
I have two questions. So
Great.
looking at, and thank you so much. Um, in my brain, I'm nerding out to think, man, one system change, like a small tweak in the UX, right? User experience of getting an instant code can make this magnificent difference. And it is pretty significant. If we are looking at the previous year, so this in one of the line charts that you were showing, I'm really interested in, sure, 2024 was difficult, hard year, but it even has been even more significant since previous years when there really was a standard, right? And so I'm also curious, anyway, about that as well. If we're looking at, there was this baseline and it typically was falling within this certain, standard error or whatever it may be, then there was a negative year. And now we're back up even more positively with those numbers and percentages than when there was a standard. Any thoughts on that?
So let me throw out two theories, and not to put them on the spot, but if Julie or Christina Sabui here want to come off mic and weigh in on this too, your statewide efforts certainly have some insight here. I think there's two things I would probably point to. One is that more states are doing more around FAFSA completion programming and trying to drive statewide resources, events, data sharing. There's just much more of like um, there's just much more of a coordinated push here. And so that's one. The other piece is probably attributable somewhat to universal FAFSA, right? When we think about some of the states that have universal FAFSA policies now, California, Texas, Illinois, New York, New Jersey are all quite large states. And so just mechanically having that requirement and seeing them in the top 10 is pushing the FAFSA completion rate up. Again, this is the piece where we really do want to be looking at National Student Clearinghouse data from high school benchmarks and any other kind of state level SLDS to make sure that we are also seeing the throughput to college enrollment, right? Like, I don't think anyone is satisfied with just juicing FAFSA completion numbers. What we really want to see is increasing access to post-secondary pathways.
Excellent. Thank you. I do actually have two more questions. I was wrong. I had three. Apologies. Um, okay. So do you think also this uptick has anything to do with the Pell Grant announcement and FAFSA being able to, excuse me, those non-four-year degree access now through Pell Grant and FAFSA? Do you think that has any indication or influence?
I would say probably not yet.
Okay.
I think it would be too soon to say that. I mean, the Pell already pays for some, training and workforce pathways through community colleges now at two-year institutions, right? It's not just a four-year piece now. So, I think it is too early to say that Workforce Pell has anything to do here. And we have seen Pell Grant eligibility expand quite a bit as part of FAFSA, right? And the percentage of students who are
Hmm.
receiving a max Pell increase. That is good news for the field and for students. I would still be, I think, reluctant to say that that is a driver of FAFSA completion now for the class of 2026.
Yeah,
I haven't seen that message nationally, like, out like in the water as much, right? And I don't think that most students' families are like savvy public policy consumers in a way that it would impact their behavior. But that again, that's
that's
just my two
fair.
cents. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Well, and in Arizona, it still feels like the Wild West out here. So it would take even time to get that messaging and those pipelines connected to anyway. Okay. And then lastly, um, and I apologize because I'm pretty new in this space. When we looking at will your organization study what these influences or causations may be that are like, for example, will there be a case study? Well, we'll get to see this significant rise in 2026. Here are the determinants X, Y, or Z. Because I would love to be able to read and digest that, because then it could also influence other education policy as well. Um,
It's a good question. That kind of original research is not really like NCAN's wheelhouse in general. We would certainly be happy to provide the data to researchers who wanted to pursue that. We have a lot of it here. Um, I think from where the level of data that we're getting at right now at the school level, I think would be very hard to do the kind of econometric analysis that you're talking about, frankly. And so this would probably be better off with um, more state level analyses, frankly, where they can connect it with a student information system, right, and get some of the other like demographic covariates that the FAFSA data doesn't currently collect. Um, that's kind of
and
I'm not actually an academic, right? So I'm loath to be like, well, here's how I would set up the design. I'm like, I don't know. So
I'm also not. That's why some of my language and the vernacular isn't always in the same that maybe someone who is. I do appreciate this state level lens. And I do think that in Arizona we do have some really great state leaders and conveners and things like that. And I would be highly curious to see. I'm sure it would vary state by state with the unique cultures and geographic areas and populations that exist. So, thank you so much.
yeah, for sure. Arizona tomorrow at the Student Financial Aid Administrators Conference. So
Well, thank you. Thank
all
you.
right.
Does anyone else have any questions or points of discussion to bring up? Thank you so much to you all for being here, and a special thanks to Bill, as always, for your enlightening and informative presentation. I really appreciate how you take the data and describe it to us in a way that's incredibly digestible. So it's a good model for the community. Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks. So I will send out the recording and Bill's slide deck and more information about how you can stay involved with this community. So we have a quarterly meeting coming up in April, so there'll be more information on that in your inboxes. Thanks again, everyone.
Good to see you all. Have a great day.